And hello, everybody. As we're all kind of getting connected here, welcome to the end of April 2021, the Microsoft Teams and O365 Power User Group. Uh, we are really excited to have everyone here. I know as
Oh,
I'm just killing some time as we get everybody admitted from the lobby. A couple of housekeeping notes. Please, we're working to mute folks, but please go ahead and mute yourself. And as we go along, um, we are going to use the question panel up there, or also use the raise a hand function as we go through. Corey's going to really work through about 45 minutes to an hour of content. We're going deep, and we're going to be talking about some theory, and then we're actually going to show you the practice. So that's what the power user sessions is. We go deeper technically than we typically do in our other events that we've done. So we're really excited about those who are joining us today. So go ahead and start posting questions in the chat. If you have any, you can do that starting now. We'll either interject them, but most likely we'll wait till the end to ask them, or we might be able to actually answer them during the session. So by the way, I'm Nathan Austin. I'm going to be helping facilitate today. We've got Stephanie Kingsley who's producing, and we've got Corey Wolf, who's going to be doing the majority of the presentation and technical deep dives. So Stephanie and I will be trying to watch the chat and see if we can answer questions offline, but most likely we're going to be waiting and holding those for towards the end. We might have some questions that we ask. So we always, throughout the sessions, we always recommend like being interactive on the chat. We're trying to replace as much as possible the feeling of being in the room, where we say, hey, raise your hand, or can you acknowledge if this is something that affects you? So keep that in mind. We are trying to make it as much of a interactive experience, but yet letting Corey get through the content for everybody at the same time. So we're trying to find that balance. So thanks for your patience and help with that as we work through it. So go ahead, Corey, next. So here's a high level of the agenda. I'm not going to go through every single last detail, but today's session is really going to be about guest users, guest access. We've been building up to it. So if this is your first time joining us, our previous sessions we've done leading up to why you might create different permissioning structures and team structures and the permissioning groups and how all this stuff works. And now we're getting to the point of like, well, why might you create guest access either inside of a team or a guest team, etc. So Corey's going to be digging into lots of different scenarios, permissionings, security restrictions that you might consider as you're contemplating whether or not enabling guest access is something that you want to be able to do for your organization. That's high level we're going to be doing covering today. So but before we get into all that, I always like to touch on one thing, 1 minute about my tech. So Corey, if you wouldn't mind moving it one more slide. We always like to let folks know that look, we are a small and medium business consulting, IT and business consulting organization. We're not organizations. Ultimately, over the 20 years of us being in business, we have developed a proven IT strategy. It doesn't mean it's the only IT strategy, by the way. It just means that it's a proven strategy that we know by following this plan, we can actually achieve proven results for our clients with higher reliability, higher productivity, and fewer downtime issues due to IT. Really, we're just trying to remove some of those IT challenges because, as many of you know, we all have plenty of other challenges that we're battling with and that we're dealing with on a regular basis that we can spend our time on. So we're just trying to take IT as one of those things off your plate, ultimately, so you can focus on serving your customers better and being more adaptable to the other business challenges we all inevitably face. When we work together with our clients in a collaborative way from a planning perspective, strategic planning and budgeting, we know that our clients can achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. If you'd like to learn more about that, raise your hand sometime, say hi. We'd love to have a longer conversation. We know that's not why you're here today, though, but I always like to touch on that briefly before we dig into everything else. So one last thing, Corey, if you wouldn't mind, move to the next slide before we go. Really, this content is targeted towards a subset of your team that we call power users. One of the things that we encourage our clients to consider is that Microsoft by default allows anyone in your organization to create a team inside of Microsoft Teams. When you do that, you're also creating a SharePoint site. You're also creating a permissioning group. You're creating a bunch of structure, and you could have files that get stuck there that you don't even know exist if you don't know that those teams were created. So what we recommend is that you restrict the ability to create a team and to create structure. And one of those roles that we recommend restricting that to is allowing power users to be maybe a go-to resource in your organization to do that. So they're connecting the organizational needs to the technology, and that's one of the reasons why these sessions we're trying to enable you as our clients or you as an organization to be as autonomous as you possibly can by trying to identify who power users are in your organization. They can really help connect those dots and drive forward. That's not a Microsoft designation, by the way. That's something that we've done and we've called it that due to, so you're not going to Google power user Microsoft settings and it doesn't exist. But it's really intended to be the person or persons in your organization that can really help drive change in the structure. So that's who this audience is, this content is targeted towards. And we look forward that you enjoy it. Hope that you enjoy it. So Corey, without further ado, Corey Wolf, I'm privileged to have him here today. I'm excited that he's here. So Corey, please take it away as far as digging in to guest access and guest user content.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. So, all right, welcome everyone. So just kind of a quick point, just like Nate had mentioned. So previously there have been sessions about Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and kind of what you can do within those within an organization, but this is looking outside of that, what you can do with people outside of your organization. And just a couple of things to remember is that, Teams kind of lives in SharePoint, right? It ties in with SharePoint, chat ties in with OneDrive. So a lot of these features that we'll enable and we'll look at, guest access, will be on both the Teams side and in SharePoint. We'll pop kind of back and forth so you can see both those things when we go through the demo. And then, the groups that have been talked about, I believe the first or second session was on groups. All those groups, they play together into making all of this work, assigning with permissions and everything there. So just to kind of a quick recap on what we had before. And just as a reminder, here's a quick overview of all the licensing. All of these licenses do enable the ability to have guest users connect in. One thing to note is that there is kind of a limit though, right? So you can't have, millions of guest users. You can have, one per each user licensed. You get 5 guest users that can be connected to the tenant. So, but all of the licensing, the business SKUs, the Office 365, the Microsoft 365, they all give the ability to have guest users. So as we go into it, just kind of talking on the high level, there are basically 4 different roles within the 365 environment. So you have administrators, and that would be the MyTech side of it, where we're the ones who will configure the back end, make sure the guest access is set up the right way with the proper permissions and pieces like that, who can invite, all those kind of pieces. And then you have the owner. That's going to be the person who is more or less responsible for the day-to-day operations within that particular team or SharePoint site. Think of it like a mini admin over that particular site or that particular team, so they can control who can be part of it, who can't be part of it. They can create new Teams channels, all of those kind of elements within that. You have a member who, that's basically, people within your organization. And then we get to guests. So talking about guests, we have the Microsoft definition for guests. So a guest is someone who isn't an employee, a student, or member of your organization. They don't have a school or work account with your organization. So for example, this may include partners, vendors, suppliers, or consultants. And anyone who is not part of your organization can be added as a guest in Teams. This means that anyone with a business account that is in Azure Active Directory account or a consumer email account, including, like Outlook.com or Gmail or any other service out there, can participate as a guest in Teams with access to Teams and channel experience. This also works the same within the SharePoint environment as well. So as we talk about guests, there's 2 terms that are kind of used out there. And the second one is external users. And so there can be a lot of confusion between what's what, are they both the same? So if you hear the terms, they're often used interchangeably, but an external user is slightly different than a guest user. A guest user actually gets a user account within your organization that can be tied to groups, permissions, a lot of those things that have been talked about previously. So in a sense, an external user is similar, except they don't get an account created. The best way I could explain it is everyone part of this meeting, you're more or less an external user connecting to this this Teams meeting. Okay, so you don't have an account. We can't control permissions over your individual account. A lot of it can be like a one-on-one or a one-on-many session like this within there. So going into some of the next pieces, we have benefits of guest access. So when I look at some of the benefits and some of the things out there, there's a lot of organizations that in the past have had to email files around or use features like Google Drive or Dropbox or pieces like that to share files, to send things back and forth. And a lot of times those are a fixed file. So if you had 4 or 5 people working on a single file together, you send it out. One person makes updates, another person makes updates, another person makes updates, and each person emails that file back and forth. Eventually, updates get missed, right? With the SharePoint and the team side of things, you have that collaboration where you can all work on that same file. And every update is live across everyone, so you can all see it together. And file sharing. Some organizations, they use FTP servers to share files. In a sense, you can actually almost use SharePoint in that same capacity. A few setups that I have seen is where inside of a SharePoint file, you create a document library, which we've talked about how to kind of create groups and libraries before in another session. But we can take a specific library within inside of a SharePoint site, and we can actually share that out to a group of people who would be considered guest users. So they can actually come in and access that, and you can put files in there, they can come in and get them, or they can put files in there for you and you can pull those files out and review them, work on them together. And a lot of times in the past, what I've seen is where you have somebody who you want to collaborate with, get an email address connected into the accounts and all of those things. Well, you have to create an account for them. You have to, put that account in there, give them permissions, all those kind of things. Traditionally within like an older environment where you have the on-premises servers, you've got some kind of funny things to deal with there. Guest access can really kind of simplify that and reduce licensing needs, because you can send and create a guest user access with somebody who's just using a standard old Gmail account, or something else there that they have. Maybe they're another organization that you're trying to partner with, and you create a whole set of guest group for that team, that organization. You pull it all together. And so when you have that guest access, you have those accounts, then we can start to do permission controlling, right? So you can say, this group of users has access to this group of users has access to that, just the same as you would in your on-premises file structure, but now you can actually bring in people outside the organization. And I think another key big piece of this is identity verification, right? So, in sometimes you'll see, somebody sends out a link, that link gets shared around. You can actually control, like, unless that email address that the person's logging in with is on that approved list, they can't necessarily get in and access those files. They can't look at them. You can do other elements in there, like setting expiration dates on links for that sharing. And so you have that, and then data retention, which is huge. As we've talked about before, that within SharePoint and the Teams environment, the files are maintained within that environment. You have revision history. You've got, some of those, if you're backing up the whole system, you've got backups of it. And then, when you're working with people outside the organization, if somebody does decide to do something malicious, you've got that protection there. You can even apply things like data loss prevention policies and, different policies like that to help protect that data. All right, so as we talk about the guest access and who should or shouldn't have access, we do have some things that we have to think about, right? A big one is who should be able to invite guests. This can be restricted down to, do you want just administrators to be able to invite guests? Do you want the Teams or SharePoint site owner to be able to invite guests? How about all users, right? Do you want anybody who's part of that group to be able to invite a guest? You can even set it so guests can invite other guests. Basically, anybody who has an account within your organization's Azure Active Directory could invite a guest. Obviously, we wouldn't necessarily recommend that because then, very easily could get people invited. And then there's always the ability just to turn off guest access. So nobody can invite, nobody can be, brought in as a guest, any of those elements there. But, there's a lot of advantage with the guest access as we're rolling through here. So then another consideration is guest user management. So as I mentioned before, when we have guest users, it actually creates an account within your Azure Active Directory. So just like a user account, you want to think about a guest as somebody who's going to be within your, sharing your collaboration more than just maybe one file or two, but like a long-term partnership. I think of MyTech and the some of the events we've done in the past where we've actually used the guest access features to create, a team site and a SharePoint site to build out the event that we're going to do together. As I have a use case kind of on that here in just a little bit. But, who's going to manage those users? That's something you have to consider, giving permissions to yes, allow a guest, no, not allow guests, remove the guest user accounts, when the partnership is no longer there and no longer needed. Something else to consider is group membership, right? So as we've talked about groups, right, you're going to create different groups to give permissions to different things, and sometimes this groups can be set up with dynamically, so any user gets automatically added to the groups and things like that. So sometimes as you're thinking about guest access, we have to think about the groups, who should be part of those groups, who shouldn't be part of those groups. Do you have a group that you want a specific guest user to be part of outside the organization? As it was kind of mentioned in the definition, consultants are a great, thing to think about those group memberships with across internal and external facing groups. And then obviously the guest permissions are another big one that we want to consider. So as we look at the guest permissions, we have quite a few different things to think about on that side. So within Teams, you have different meeting settings. So if you have a guest, do you want them to be able to share video? Do you not want them to share video? Do you want them to be able to share their screen or their entire desktop or a specific application? These are all ways to narrow it down. Sometimes as we've had all these virtual meetings, you share your screen and then you kind of pop some things around and you share something or people see something you didn't intend. That's where you can kind of limit that down for the guests that you have who are invited to your group. You also have the ability, like Meet Now. So you can go into a Teams channel and hit Meet Now and create a mini meeting. You can allow this for your guest users to be able to do that or not. And then there's auto meeting admit. So like our Teams meeting that we have here for this presentation, you join, you go into a lobby, and then we say, yes, you can come in. You have the ability to say, hey, if this person is a guest within our organization, just go ahead and let them join meetings, or you can have it say, nope, keep them in the lobby. And you have that across, all access as well. You can put it so all users have to be admitted or not. Right. And then from there you have some message settings. So, we have a chat where you can, in our meeting here, you can post, questions, comments, things like that. If you use Teams in your organization, you're using chats back and forth, and you can, sorry. And some of those you can edit, you can delete, you can even post things like, little GIFs or smiley faces. All of that's controllable for guest users. And for users internally, but as you're looking at guest users, what do you want them to be able to do, right? So as I think about a guest user, do I want them to be able to post a whole bunch of chats and then delete them? Or do I want to maintain that and only let them edit them? Or just make it so they can only post the chat and that's the end of it, right? So think of it, in that sense of a text message. A lot of times you can't edit a text message after it's sent. Do you want it to be like that? Or do you want it to be, modifiable? And then the same kind of comes over to the SharePoint OneDrive side of things. So you have external sharing links, and we'll look at how to get a link. But with those external sharing links, how do you want that link set up? Do you want it set to, only allow the users that are in the list to be able to open that link? Do you want it to be anybody in the world who has the link? Do you want it to be anybody within the organization? These are all the things that we have to think about as we're, setting up this guest access. Is, as we share a link to a guest, there's the possibility that they could, pass that on to somebody else who's not part of the organization or part of guest, a guest within your group that, could be damaging to an organization. So those are things that as you go through, you have to think, how far do I want these links to be able to be shared? And then do you want your guests to be able to view, edit, or upload documents? You can set all of these settings up either on the SharePoint side as a default, so you could do full settings on the SharePoint site all the way across with view, edit, upload. And then you can get more granular into a specific folder or a specific file, and you can say, hey, only allow editing, or only allow uploading, or only allow view only access. Even with some of these links and the access, you can actually set expirations. So if a user, has a link, you send it over to them and you say, hey, can you please fill out this form? You could set that so they have 24 hours, a week, 2 weeks, a month, to be able to access that SharePoint site through that link. And then you can also set up request access. So maybe you have a partner organization that you work with and they have we'll use a marketing team, right? So you have a marketing team, they have a marketing team, and they share files back and forth. Well, let's say your partner organization gets a new employee within the marketing team. They can be given that link and they might not have access because their email address isn't on the list. But when they go to that link, it'll allow them to, submit their email address to get access, and that'll go to the site owner. And then the site owner can then permit them access to that particular site. Or that particular folder or file, whatever it happens to be that they are trying to request access to. And so all of these things are kind of, those things we have to take into consideration as we are preparing to, add guest users to our tenant, to our Microsoft group. And so as we look at the guest experience, so what are they going to get? You can send it out to them. So they'll get an email invitation saying, hey, you have been invited to this by so-and-so. They'll have a link on there. They click on that link, and then it gives them access to, say, the Teams, to the SharePoint. And then for those that do use the Teams client, so if I'm using the Teams client and I'm already logged in with, my MyTech account, and somebody sends me an invitation, I'm going to have to restart the Teams client, so it'll register that new account within that Teams client. But then I can switch back and forth between, the two different groups. I can send things directly to them and so forth. We'll kind of look at that here in a minute. But then you have a native organization within your Teams client, right? So for me, my native organization is MyTech. But then if I have a I'm a guest in another one, it shows up as a kind of secondary organization that I can go to. As I mentioned, you do have to kind of switch between the different tenants within the team client, and we'll look at that here. And then this is where it gets a little different with the Teams experience. So if it's a direct message, they'll likely get a prompt on their computer as if it was somebody within your own organization. You'll get that little window in the corner that says so-and-so sent you a message. You click on that message, it'll take you into Teams. It'll switch the tenant automatically for you over so that they can actually start to interact on that. Channel mentions. So within a channel, you can do the at, Billy Bob, and it'll prompt them saying, hey, you have a message that was sent to you in a channel. Those won't give that nice prompt on the bottom of the window, but if they do miss it within Teams, it does prompt an email after 60 minutes of no response or not checking that channel. So they'll still get that communication, email saying, hey, you missed out on this, and you can go in and then check that out. So that's kind of the guest side of things. As I look at it, there's a couple of use cases when I think about guest access within Teams that I kind of just wanted to present. So one is nonprofit organizations. And I know it's kind of been mentioned in a different session, but a lot of times nonprofit organizations have board members. They are outside of the organization. They don't have an account within the organization. They might be a board member for several organizations, and the more that they have, the more they have to manage, the more difficult it can be, right? So if they have 10 different accounts they have to manage, as everyone here I'm sure is aware, it's hard to remember account, usernames, passwords, all of that. Well, this kind of simplifies that because they can use that same one account to get access to multiple Microsoft tenants. In the demo that I'm going to walk through, we're going to use a Gmail account and invite it as a guest so we can see how that works. But oftentimes within that, what does that do for you? Well, it gives you the ability to share meeting minutes right there. It gives you the ability to have somebody update meeting minutes, everybody watch meeting minute updates at that same time, or discussion in between board meetings on different topics. There can be the ability to use like a planner or a to-do or different things like that to help assign out all those different things that the board would like to do, would like to see, would like to work on, and gives them one single platform to build all of that together. And as I think too, it's also hosting and recording meetings, because sometimes it's easier for people to listen to a meeting than try to read through meeting minute notes and decipher them. A few meeting minute notes I've seen, it's really just high level bullet points, and you miss out on all that the finite discussion, and that's where that recording can really come in handy. And so you have all these individuals who can now join and be part of that outside of your organization without having to create them an account, without having to complicate things more for them. So that's kind of that first use case that I wanted to present there with that. Now, the second one, and this is, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but is event planning. So you can partner together with multiple companies, and I didn't mention this earlier, but you can actually even restrict down guest users to a specific email domain, right? So if we had a partner of Microsoft.com to do an event with, I could just lock it down so that only MyTech and Microsoft could partner together, and they could have access to our tenant. But it's event planning. So it's events between organizations, and planning can be very complex. You can again have lots of those to-dos, lots of those flyers to share, and things to update. And it's one centralized place where everybody can come together and work on it. They can have those meetings. They can use those features, planner, to-do. You can have calendars, all the features within Teams and the OneDrive, or the SharePoint side of things can all be pulled together into one, big kind of picture environment. So you have that there. As I said, multiple companies partnering together to, work together and make everybody's lives easier and a little bit more seamless. So those are the kind of couple of use cases. I'm going to switch over here, and I have just a little bit of some a couple of virtual machines here that we're going to be switching between, so we can kind of see what this looks like in a real world application. So here I have a Teams site, and if I'm looking at, as a site owner, wanting to be able to invite guests, now this is having the admins already configured everything in the back end, which we talked about the things to consider there, and that's the advantage of having a consultant partner like MyTech, where we can help you work through what settings should you use, shouldn't you use, what can we set up for you, and get you in the best possible environment, considering security and all those other pieces. But if I'm looking to invite a guest user, and what we're going to do here is this is our demo tenant, and then over here I have another one that, now this is a just regular Gmail account user, not tied to a Microsoft tenant or domain. But we are going to come in here and we are going to invite that user. So what I'll do is I'll come under my guest access demo, and I have more options here. And so here we have, managed team, add channel, add members, all of these pieces here. But if I go to add member, it's going to give me the ability to start to add members. Now, if it's somebody within our organization, and I will use, Nate Austin, right? So here, somebody who's already within my organization, it's going to give me, who they are, and right there. So that's what it looks like if they're within our organization. But if I do somebody outside the organization, oh, I have an extra character in here. It's going to show me that, hey, here's somebody out there that you're going to invite. It's not a member of your tenant, and I want to invite them as a guest. So I can click on that, and then I can click add, and now it's going to send them an email, and we will give that a second to go here. That email will have been sent, and we'll close. So then if we pop over here, well, I had this open. Come on. 1 second here. All right, so within their email, they are going to get an email like this that says, you have been added as a guest to a tenant. And then from here, I can say, open in Microsoft Teams. And this is the experience that, as we're talking about those guest users, the board members that you might have, this is what they would see. And so we are going to do that here. They would get a login.
So Corey, just to clarify that password that you just entered, you talked about, is that the email password? Or
Yep. So that's, yes. So that's the email password for that user, right? So basically that user has to log in, has to authenticate that they are really who they are. So, if somebody were kind of just monitoring their email, they don't have the password, they can't log in. It's that identity verification that I had mentioned earlier about the advantage of having a guest user. So this is the password for their, like the Gmail account that I'm using here. And so it's going to tell me here that, I put that in, it says, yep, this is the guy, Google authenticated. Yep, that's it, him, that's his account. And then it's going to, change us to reviewing permissions and saying, hey, are you, this is what you got, this is what you have to accept, and then you accept. Yep, so that's that identity verification. And you can even go into, since they have a guest account, you can even apply policies, like conditional access, policies where they have to use multi-factor authentication and things like that to take that extra step towards security and proving who they are.
This is a good example, though, of what you're at right here, Corey, is that
Yep.
you don't want to open it in Teams because that'll actually possibly could kill the session. So this is where you can. So I say this not because of the obviousness of we're on a presentation live right now, and it might break that, but it's also if you're trying to test and demo this at home or at your office, you can use the web browser and Teams to kind of play back and forth, kind of like what Corey's doing. So that's something that we've done, and but it's a little bit of a gotcha, just if you're aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So now the advantage here of me using the other side here is I can easily access in with that. So, but like I said, we have to restart the Teams client. So I'm going to close the Teams client on this virtual machine and relaunch Teams. So you can
see you're using a virtual machine, so that's why you're able to do this. Okay.
Oh yes, yes, yep.
I should have known. Corey's a technical person. He's going to do the more fancy technical stuff here. So,
yep.
So thank you for.
Yep, not a problem. And of course, my virtual machine is deciding to have internet issues now.
Yes. You'll need the internet.
Yeah, you'll need the internet. All right. 1 second here as we try and make this thing happy again. Anyhow, so, but since they've now, since we've done that, I'm going to come back over to the other virtual machine here. So now I can review members, and I should see members that are added in here. And it looks like my VMs are all doing the same thing right now. All right, well, 1 second here.
So this is, as Corey, as you're working on that, this is an example. One of the pain points that we've heard from our different organizations we've worked with. There's two fronts. One is on the nonprofit side in particular, where instead of instead of creating an account inside of your organization, like using whatever your domain name is, like board member at your domain name.com or .org. And then what ends up happening is that you've basically created a new username and password that they have to remember. And you know what that means is that if you've created a new username and password that they have to remember, that typically means that they're going to not remember that because they're only going to access it maybe when they need to engage with the board. However, and then now that's another thing you have to manage. It's another license you have to pay for, depending on the license that you get as a nonprofit. But if you use the guest environment and actually set them as a guest account, you basically can set up an account with them based on whatever email address they give you. And so they could give, if they use Teams for, like, if I was on a board, I could give the nonprofit my @mytech email address. And then it's all going to be part of my tenant, and the way that password and access is managed is the same way my organization manages @mytech.com. So when I reset my password, it'll automatically work together. I don't have to remember another password in order to be able to access the guest tenant. So that's one of the things from a user management perspective. You don't have to worry about that. So that's one of the big advantages of using guest. So there are some permissions on the back end, as Corey was alluding to, that you're going to want to set up to do that. But that's one of the big advantages. The other one is, using the scenario of event planning. It's the same concept applies, but where I've definitely seen, and this applies to the board too, but where you can actually do file collaboration, right? You could be actually editing, multi-user editing files, all the same kind of stuff you can do with Teams internally. You can enable that externally as well. By just enabling the guest by using guest access. Again, you can choose what permissions and what you allow to do in that regard. And you can even use private channels. That's the other thing that I found too, is you can use private channels with guests as well. So it gives you all the flexibility of basically if they're part of your environment, but that you don't have to give them yet another username and password to manage. They can manage their own. So it's one less thing you have to do, one less thing they have to remember, which usually makes folks a little bit happier. So, so Corey, I see you're going here. I'm hoping that trying to give some illustration, but we do see that. And we do hear that from lots of different organizations where they weren't aware of the ability to, or they didn't know how to set the guest permissions. And so they just created another account that then they had to manage. And then it was also a little bit painful for their external guest that they're trying to really make it easy for them to access and connect. So.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you for that there. So looks like we're back in business after a quick reboot here on those. So as you can see in our, this is the demo tenant. Now I have a, guest listed. It shows me that I have a guest listed. And as we go into the SharePoint side of things, we'll be able to see some of the things that we can do over there on that side. And as Nate had mentioned, even private channels. So I do have a private channel here. And as we look at that particular channel, we can see that guest user is not a part of it, but we could invite this, the guest user as part of this private channel here. And we can see now that since they have an account, they're going to show up here just like it did previously. And we'll notice that it says EXT for external, right? And so now I have given that user access to that particular private channel. So if we pop back over into
Corey, as you're doing that, one of the things I always like to throw, like oftentimes one of the most common things I've seen with a private channel relative to like a board, if it's a nonprofit, again, is if you want to restrict collaboration of content. Maybe you're trying to work on the CEO or the executive director's compensation plan, or maybe there's a strategic planning group that's really collaborating, but you don't want to give everyone else access to that yet because you haven't kind of approved it or isn't finalized. So just thinking about how a private channel is really like more of a again, just keeping it a little more confidential for the team, the same members of the team or a subset of the members of the team, or it's also just some sort of other collaboration that might happen where it's in production or it's in progress, not in production, excuse me, in progress. I mean, work that you're working on before you release it, maybe out to the general team as a whole. So that's common ways in which we see the private teams use, and they're trying to think about how that might apply to an external guest user as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I just created another channel called sensitive information, right? Same thing, right, that we're talking about. So you have sensitive information. And so as we come back over here to our Gmail user, up in the corner, now we should have, that is not the right one. All right, we got to go back into the Gmail account here. Hang on. We'll have to relaunch that here in the Gmail account. All right. So now as we open up that here, give me a second here. So it's going to launch Teams. And it is going, come on, give us the tenant. All right, well.
I think that's right. It hit the Corey Wolf guest.
Well, that might be my other tenant that I was doing with demo
right.
test work too, but we'll give it a shot. If not, it still works because I created some things. Yep. So that was the test tenant that I was doing that I removed the user from. All right. So we'll close Teams. We can go into the web-based version here as well.
Yeah, part of where you're clicking on is where if people are using Teams, like if you use Teams and you're invited as a guest to another tenant, where Corey was clicking in that upper corner is where you basically have to go to switch between those organizations. Like right there is where Corey's showing that is where you switch. So if you haven't been invited to a guest team, one of the reasons why Corey talked earlier about what the guest experience is, and so that's what this is an example of how to manage through that.
Yeah, and so all right. All right, so here is that demo tenant, right? We have the guest demo. I have the private channel here that's visible, but as I look at what I have, I also have that sensitive information, as Nate was talking about, information that you don't want everybody to see, that's blocked with that private channel. And you can see here, this is the first channel post that was posted yesterday. We can make, mention here, we can say, hi there. As go through, and then we can come over, and then we have the hi there. And then as you can see, it tells you right here, okay, here's who it is, and they're a guest within that space. And it goes even to that same thing. So this account that we have is it's a non-Microsoft account, but I have a sample Word document here, and I can still come in through this and edit that document. And we'll see that here. I'll pull it up on both sides. So this is in the web-based, but here's some info for the demo. This is from the Gmail account, and we'll go over to the Teams client with the demo, and we have that information right there. So as you can see, it's live updated, and then I can come in and some new info, and you can see it shows me even like who's there, who's in the document, who's editing it. And so they don't need to have that, Office licensing and all of that to be able to collaborate with you. So something to keep in mind is we're talking about, not having to pay for a license for them for all of these extra things. They still have full functionality of that within that tenant, even though they're not part of your tenant and not licensed in your tenant. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that last part, Corey, because that's a question we get asked a lot, which is, well, how does that work? Do you have to license guest users? Do you have to license Word? Any of that kind of stuff? And the answer is no, because it basically gives the web browser version access to those applications like Word and Excel, et cetera, for guest users, so you don't have to worry about that. So again, another reason to use the guest functionality when it's applicable is because you don't have to worry about managing that stuff. You just get to allow them to have access, and they can use a browser, or if they have Teams, because they are licensed for Teams, they can use the full application, and they can use the full licensing if that's what they have.
Yep. So perfect. So we're gonna see if it will let me get the Teams client working here. So then, but as we had, so then, you can collaborate there. This isn't necessarily like a full Teams demo, but you have the ability to add the extra features within Teams, right? So even if I were to add in like to-dos or a document library, with that guest access, you would have access to that as well, if that's what you had desired. Now we will pull up here. And so this is something else to show too, is so that within browsers, if you weren't aware, you can create multiple profiles. So we have multiple profiles within this experience in this demo here. So this is the demo, and we're going to kind of come into the SharePoint side, and went over here. And so then we have that site, right? So even within the site, and this is kind of going into some of that guest access, we have the site contents, and we have the documents. So even within here, we have different settings that can be set. And this is kind of a little more technical, but we can come in and we can control the permissions for that document library. So we could even take that guest user and say that they no longer have write permissions, but only read permissions. We can do different file settings, versioning. We can see all those different pieces within there. And as I had mentioned before, with having the different companies, maybe using it like an FTP type site. So here you can create different document libraries, and you can actually assign guest users to specific document libraries. So they only have access to that particular document library. So users from company A, you can set so they only have company A access. They can't see what's in company B or in company C or in documents. You can go that particular that granular with it, like you can with your kind of on-premises infrastructure, right? If you want users to be able to access the whole company share, you can give it to them, but then you can block them access from specific folders within that access.
And
So
Corey, that's at more of at a document library level,
Yep.
right? So it's one of the things I say that because it's not just a subfolder of a document library. It's actually at the document library level. So I think that's one of the things that understanding the difference there, and that's if you want more granular controls than that, then typically not using a Teams site is the answer. And we've talked about that in past sessions. We're not going to dig into that now, but just to clarify the difference between those two as well when you're talking about that kind of granular permissions.
Yep. Yeah. So you can do that. Yeah. This is a document library here. Yep. All right. So we were going to go to over here. Wrong one. All right. So we were going to, we will just stick with in there. So I'm talking about part of the guest access as well as we're going through that. So if I had a document that I wanted to share out, and I do have, external sharing and guest sharing enabled, I can come into a document within SharePoint and I can actually come to share, right? So I can say, I want to share this file with somebody, right? And they don't necessarily have to be within your organization, right? You can specify it here, right? So I can share this link with anyone. Again, like I said, that's not necessarily recommended because anyone who has that link can access it. And if it's sensitive information and that gets out, the wrong people are going to get access to it. But you have, people within your organization, people with existing access or specific people. So you could say, I have this one file I want to share with one person at this other organization. You can set that. And then
some of these too, or just to mention it, like notice how anyone with the link is grayed out. So that's a back end administrative permission you can set. So some of these you can, those permissions that Corey was talking about at the beginning, will, by setting them there, it will dictate or provide what is capable here when you're actually able to share something.
Yep. Yep, perfect. Thank you. Yep. So, we can specify, do we want them to edit it? Do we want them to not edit it? And the nice thing is if you, allow editing, well, do you want them to be able to download it? Yes or no? Do you want them to be able to only work on it within SharePoint? And so you have all of these settings that you can enable within here. Do you want to allow them to edit it, open in read-only mode or open in full, editing mode, right? So you can say, oh, when they open it, it's in read-only mode, and they have to click a button to allow them to edit it. And then you can apply these settings to that. And then here's where you can start to specify, people. So I've got, you can search the directory, you can find individuals who you want to send that link to. So if we do, right, I can find several individuals, I can hit send, and it will send them a link to that. And get an email like that. The other option I can do is I can actually just say copy this link, and then I can take that link and I could just, come right into, Teams, or if you're sharing that with specific individuals, and you could just post that link right there, and then they can click that link, gives them that access, right? So that's part of giving, that guest access to getting them within and how to access files, how to collaborate with them. So you have that sharing feature here, or you can just, take that link, throw it directly into an email straight to them. As it says, you can just click the Outlook button. It'll take you right over to Outlook. And load up for us here. I'm giving it just a second. And see here, it's got it already, a link there. We can send that over to, I'll just use my account there, right? So it's I can use well, that would be the wrong one, sorry. There we go. That's what I was going for. We want to use the MyTech address. We can put in, check this out, and we can send that right over to them. And this is a link right to that document. So, they can get in, and we said, our permissions with that share, no, that was, anybody with that link can edit, right? So within that organization. So I could change that to specific people, put in that account, and then I would be able to edit it. So that is. Yep.
Corey, can I ask a question about one of the things now that, so we've talked about how we can have guests get so Teams access, which then extends to file access and SharePoint access. But you mentioned OneDrive. Like this is actually something I'm candidly curious about because I've never looked at it or tried to figure it out. But can you either grant or restrict access so that the sync functionality for someone as a guest to be able to download to OneDrive, does that work?
Yeah, so
I'm assuming yes, but I can't believe not sure.
Yep. So that's a great question. So as I had mentioned earlier, we have some different permissions, and I'm going to go into the SharePoint side here.
And you're logging in, just to be clear, you're logging in as the global admin for SharePoint. So this is something that unless you have global admin permissions, which probably nearly no one in your organization does, unless you are the IT administrator for your organization, will not have this access.
Yeah, but it's good to see, just to get the picture, right? So external sharing, right? So we have permissions that we can set for SharePoint and for OneDrive. So even if you have files within your own personal OneDrive, you can actually share those out of your OneDrive just like you can out of SharePoint. And so, it falls into those same things. So I can actually configure this individually. So I can say only, what do I want for OneDrive? Only people in your organization, or existing guests and people in your organization, or, new and existing guests. And obviously this will include the people in your organization or below, or anyone. So you can specify that for SharePoint or for OneDrive, and then you can actually do just that same exact thing out of OneDrive. So we'll open up OneDrive. And we will create a new file here. So we will create that new file. And we'll give it a second to finish loading. And so I have this new file. So this is within my OneDrive, as you can see up here in the corner. It's that same thing. So I can actually come in here, I can go share, and I can do that same exact process, within my own OneDrive. So I could share this with somebody outside of, this demo tenant directly. So I can say, I want to share this with a specific person, and I can put in, an email address, and I can hit send. And it tells me that that person's outside my organization. So it does give you that warning, right? That, hey, so-and-so is not in your organization, or, kind of that confirmation to make sure that's what you want to do.
But the administrative site that you were just showing us is where you can grant or deny the ability to do exactly what you showed, right?
Exactly. Yep. And so we have that granular control, so we can do that between SharePoint and OneDrive. So it might be that you don't want anybody to share OneDrive out, and we, turn that way down just to people in the organization, and SharePoint, keep it at, with including guests. So, and here, just to show, like, here's that link, I will open that link, and come here. And here it's actually going to request, that I get verification on who I am. So it will let me send a code. It's going to send a code back to my email. And this is where we were talking about earlier about having that ability for identity verification, and all of that. So we have, that protection that we can add in as well. So I'm just waiting for that code to come through here. So, and it will allow me to verify that. And as you can see, it's telling me I've got a secure link, and in my password so I can get in. And here now I have access to that file that is out of that OneDrive, right? Here I put some adjustments in there. I'll go back to that web browser, and here it is, right? So I'm live collaborating on a OneDrive file that's within that, that particular user on the demo tenant's OneDrive with an external or external user. So I'll get that out of the way here. There we go. Stuck. Okay. So that is the ability to do that within SharePoint or OneDrive. So I think, having this picture here of the external sharing capabilities is helpful. So you have the granularity to do it on both individually. So, all right.
Great.
Yep.
But I'm not sure if you have much more of the demo, but we're just hitting the hour mark, which is where we said we wanted to try and do either content and demo. So if you have anything else quick to wrap up, I'd say let's wrap up, and then we can open it up for more questions from the rest of the attendees.
Yep. No, I think that's kind of about what I wanted to show, giving the ability how to add a guest user, and all of the features and how to share links. So yeah, so any questions that anybody has would be great. Please throw them in chat, raise your hand, and we'll get those answered. We can, if you want to see something again, let us know. I can kind of walk through it again.
Yeah, and I was like, just to plant some seeds, but as people are thinking about asking questions, is if there's a scenario that maybe you are trying to work through, if you're comfortable sharing, I always like trying to understand that and like walk through it, because what I found is that even though we're all from different organizations, we find similar use cases, right, for similar situations. Might not be the exact same, but they're oftentimes similar. So definitely games, like if there's a nonprofit that's looking at a board site, if there's somebody else trying to do event planning, if there's someone else that's got just another vendor partner that they work with, any scenarios out there that that someone like to run through as far as how it might play out. This is the awkward pause that I like to have to maybe give people the chance to think about it. Well, that said, if there's, I'll do one more last call for some questions if you have any. But and Corey, one of the things that I think, as just to give people some time to think about it, is part of what you talked about with permissions. So we talked a little bit of theory in the beginning. Forgive me, sorry, I should have put my webcam back on. We talked a little theory in the beginning about the types of permissions, and you showed us a little bit of how to do it. But and when we talk about this content in particular is targeted towards power users, some of those permissions are not something that the power users are going to have the ability to do. Because they're not the global admin. So it's kind of like global admin, power users, team owner, team member, then guest. So there's kind of like these 5 tiers of permission levels. This is, I guess, where we would encourage the power users of an organization to either work with, folks like us, if we are your IT partner, or your internal IT that has that global access level. So I don't know, again, is there anything in particular that the power user would have the ability? And I don't know the answer to this question, by the way. I'm not sure how some of I'm never the person that looks at those granular details from a technical configuration perspective, but anything there that insight that you want to give to either the global admins in the room or the power users in the room?
Yeah, I mean, so it's basically, it's you can create a team specific admin so that they can do a lot of those settings, but most of everything that a power user or the site owner is going to have access to is under that specific, that team. So you can come in, you can create your channels as mentioned, right? You have settings, so you can do even under that. You can modify some of the permissions under that own team, right? So do you want, guests to be able to create and update channels? Do you want to allow guests to delete a channel, right? So I could come in here and I could say, yep, they can do this, and yep, they could do this, and now they can create channels, they can delete channels. You do have some member permissions within here, that allow you to set different things, some of these now, if again, this comes back to that where we were talking about having that setting that was grayed out. If some of these are set on what I would call a tenant level, those are going to be restricted to be able to be modified to a degree within each team. But you can do, within the Teams admin center, and this is where the admins come into play more, is that we can even create custom policies for a specific Teams site, right? And so that's where you can get even more granular with that. So all the teams within your organization can have policies that say, no guest access, no external sharing, and then you can create a separate team that is just for guest access where you can open up those permissions. So, we can get granular like that, but even within your own team, if you are a team owner, you can come in and you can see a lot of these settings within here and make adjustments to how you want those settings to work. So, here, as we're saying, member permissions, you have, this would be those members individually, but then also the guests. And I may have a few more things that show up here for me because I am a global admin account than you may have as just a regular old like site owner, but just be aware that yes, there are some settings you can adjust.
Yeah, Corey, so keep on this page if you wouldn't mind, because I think this is, and thank you, because I always like to do a little public service announcement around this stuff. If you haven't seen this before, is that by default, so I'm not talking about guest access at the moment. I'm talking about just regular member access. As a team owner or as a team member, you have the ability to create private channels, delete and restore channels, to create channels. So what we found when we were working with it was one organization in particular, we were working through them, and this is when I learned myself that this is the default setting, because they had people on the team that had created private channels that the department, the person that's responsible for the team, had no idea even existed. So I would actually recommend, if you're a team owner, which would be power user and team owner, so power users can make these changes too, but if you're a team owner, go to your, as Corey did, go to the breadcrumbs next to your team, check on the settings, and see if you want these all, because these are all turned on by default, which is not necessarily what we would recommend. So let alone then whether or not guest access has been granted, and then Corey has shown where you can make some choices there. But this is something that I would also encourage, especially the power users in the room. Again, this is something I want you, that we're trying to get everyone's head wrapped around, is that it may be that you might have let's say the guest access demo team, and let's say I'm the department manager or the department leader for that group. Well, if I'm not aware of these variables and knowing to add a guest, or knowing how to set permissions, or knowing not to add someone that I shouldn't add, or knowing not to share something externally that I should know how to share, if you don't trust that person's savviness and awareness of that, then don't make them a team owner. Right? Even though they might be the team lead or the department head, if they don't have the awareness of that, they can be a team member, and set yourself as a power user as the team owner, or somebody else, or global admin as the team owner, so that there needs to be some collaboration to happen before some of these settings can get changed, because that's where you could really run yourself some risk of losing data, or getting a lot of structure that you really don't want and creating a mess. So that's one of the things that this level of trying to enable people to do things and work without having to go to IT, but you also want to make sure that they have the awareness, at least in our opinion and our coaching, we want people to have the awareness of that before they're granted the permission, so that they know to look for these settings, for example. So, that's just something we like to keep in mind. So thanks, Corey, for showing this, because I always like to touch on that whenever I have a chance. And we also have a couple channels, questions in the chat here if you want to look at those for you.
Yeah, so I saw, oh, where did my chat go? All right, so we have a comment. I think that the companies using external IT companies should make sure that they get read-only permission to the admin center. It's something to note. We'll take that into account. Thank you for sharing.
Can you do that, Corey? Can you give read-only access?
You can give different permissions that Microsoft calls them role-based access control, or RBAC, and you can get pretty granular where you can create read-only users to things. You can create full admins or partial admins. Just as an example on the group, on some of those controls, like with the user, right? You can create user account or give permissions that allow a user to only modify like a user's password, or allow them to modify all their settings. This is an example. So there are ways to do some of those things. We would have to look specifically. I believe you can give somebody access to view the admin center, but a lot of times too, what we find is,
which I think is kind of cool idea.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you could even, thanks, Vicky. I always learn something new every time. This is definitely one of those things. So that you can actually do that. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think, that, within a organization, right, like there's probably going to be somebody who drives the day-to-day operations of your SharePoint and Teams operations. And those people probably should have an admin access to the SharePoint and the Teams site, right? Whereas they're not necessarily going to be a global admin to have access across everything, but they can be granted that admin access just within the SharePoint or the Teams platform, to help drive those day-to-day operations. And then, but yes, thank you for sharing. So then we have a question. Can you create a SharePoint site without setting up a Teams group? Yes, you can. They call it a legacy versus a modern SharePoint site. There's some advantages and disadvantages with that, but and they changed the name now, I think, to communication site, but you can create, a team site, or you can create a modern or a communication site. And a lot of times when you create, different things, that automatically create some of those features for you, which, as Nate alluded to in the beginning, is, we want to make sure that, certain people don't have access to do certain things, or, it muddies the waters. I know we've seen where users had the ability to create a group. So they would go in and create a group, not realizing that it created a group that then created a team site, then created a SharePoint site, then created, this resource and that resource. And then by the time you're done, you have, 50 resources created because somebody wanted to try to create, like, say, like an email distribution group or something along those lines. It's very easy to have happen. But yes, so you can, within the SharePoint platform, come in and create a communication site which does not build a Teams site in the background.
And one of the reasons why we find organizations choosing to do that, and I'll give you a couple examples. So the way the Teams permissioning works is that when you add a member to a team, they have read-write access to everything in that team. So if you create a SharePoint site that's associated with the team, you can't get any more granular than either granting access to it or not. Whereas in a communication site, you can actually apply permissions more at the levels that Corey was talking about earlier, where you can just do view only, or they have to do save as, or so they don't have necessarily full read-write access. So you can create that more granular permission. We've also seen this example as companies move their file servers to SharePoint, for example, is that we'll create a communication site that's an archive site, meaning a lot of the old legacy stuff that you don't want to just dump over because you don't want to bring over a bunch of old stuff, dump it, create a communication site that's an archive site, and you only give a few people access to it to move data when you need to move it back into the production environment. So those are a couple of reasons we've seen people use communication sites versus team sites.
And how does that, Corey, like, how does that work with then guests or external users too? Is it the same type of permissioning for those communication or non-Teams sites?
Yep. So once a guest user is created, you can assign them permissions across all of the platforms. So once you invite them, it's just like they're a user within your organization. So you can assign permissions, you can assign them to groups and all of that. So it does give them access to basically anything that you want them to have access to that's within your tenant. So, and you can lock that down to control, how much they do or they don't have, the read, the write, the full control type access. This one here, right? So that would be a communication site. So just create one.
And the other thing that I've seen people do as you're working through that, Corey, is that I've seen folks create a communication site first, and then because they're trying to get their team using SharePoint, and then they actually connect it to a team later. So that's another. You didn't ask that question, Christina, but that's one of those things that we've seen people say, well, we want to use Teams first and then go to SharePoint, and then we have people say, I want to use SharePoint first and then go to Teams. So if you end up creating communication sites, we have those out there, you can then connect them to Teams. There's going to be some permissioning work you're going to have to do if you've gotten really granular in it, but there's definitely some things you can do that there too if you're trying to build that structure.
Yeah, and so in the communication site, it lists it under as site visitors, but that's where your guests would be, right? So that you can give them that access here. Go back, general. This gets a little bit more granular on the administrative side, but you've got to come in through like site permissions, and then you can, do things where you can share the site out, change how members can share, advanced permission settings, which will give us the ability to come in here and have, like a specific group. So we'd create a group and we'd call it demo group. And here's where you can start to add, right? Do they have read or contribute or edit or design or full control access? So if it's somebody you just want read access, you would create that group. And again, this is where it's kind of the back end where you would really want to start using, somebody who's got the experience with setting up these things to have like help with it. That's where the MyTech would come in to play, and you have all these different things where you can go into view permissions, and it's got read permissions. Come back to groups here at the top. These.
And this is where, like, as you're going through this, Corey, like this is the kind of stuff where we don't expect just because you attend these sessions that or even your internal IT sometimes, if they're the permissions inside of Microsoft 365 are different than what they might be used to from Active Directory. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also a whole bunch of differences. So, and we don't have all the answers as far as how it should be applied to you. However, what we've learned is that it's a collaboration, right? Is like if you tell us, whether it's us or your internal IT team or whoever else you might be partnering with, it's like, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's the problem that I'm trying to solve. Then we can then try and figure out, well, how do we, help with the permissioning structure that makes it easy for you to then to either deploy and then manage it moving forward, create that you're looking for. So that's one of the things that, and just, Corey just showing some of the complexities is an illustration of that. We're not trying to hide things from you. It's just that there's so many different variables here for the different people. That's just knowing that there is complexity here, and this, ultimately collaborate by understanding the problem you're trying to solve, and we can, and us or others, some other IT, internal IT can help. So there's a question here in chat to Corey, to go off of Christina's question. Maybe take that.
Yeah, so to go off of Christina's question, when in SharePoint in O365, it shows the my sites, featured sites, and suggested sites. And it doesn't show like the ability to do that. So I'm guessing where you are probably at is more of, not the admin center. This pane of glass. Now you can create new sites here if you have the right permissions. And so that's going to be where my thought is that if you're trying to create a new site, you probably don't have permissions to do that. So, you have the featured, the frequent sites, all of that. And this is where you'd have that button. If I go to over here, I'm trying to think here.
Short answer, it's a permissioning.
Yeah, it's a permissions issue. Yeah.
Very similar to the reason why we don't want anyone in the organization to be able to create a team. It's the same reason why you don't want anyone in the organization to be able to create a SharePoint site, because it creates structure, it creates permissioning groups, it creates all this stuff, so that way the data that's out there and can be effectively managed and secured. We recommend that someone is having a conversation about, is this the right structure for your organization to solve the problem you're trying to solve, as opposed to giving anyone access to do that.
Yeah, so yeah, if you don't have it, your admins or whatever, that's who would give you that access, and that's where that administrative access to SharePoint comes in that we had mentioned earlier. So
Yeah, good question. And again, sometimes you might have that. I think Microsoft oftentimes by default has that turned on. Typically, when you work as do a deployment or work with an organization, that's one of the things we try and do initially is turn that off, because we've had so many organizations that have said, "Hey, we got this stuff," and then people start using it, which is on one hand that's great. I love that, but on the reverse side is that, well, it created a mess that they're now having to go back and reverse engineer and clean up, and they don't even have great visibility. Now, the global admin will always have visibility to everything, so that's so that's one of the things that you will always be able to find that in EV, but it's definitely something where we just recommend that. You don't have to do that, but that's something we recommend just because we've seen a lot of pain if you don't do that, or if you allow anyone to create sites or teams. Well, any other final questions before we adjourn? I know it's a Friday afternoon, and we appreciate all the questions and the attentiveness. But let's open up one last call for questions before we adjourn. So Stephanie's posting some links in the chat to some supporting sessions that we've done, so that if you want to go deeper into some of the topics of questions that are asked, you can. There's some links there that Stephanie's posted as well. So
who was on the call?
All right, I'm not seeing any questions come in other than thank you. So thank you very much. I'm glad everyone was able to attend. I'll tell you what, let's just wrap it up, Corey. So thanks for attending. Corey, great job on walking us through that. Demos are always fun because stuff never works perfectly. So it's okay. But thanks everybody for attending. And stay tuned. We have our next Power User Group session at the end of June. And enjoy your weekend and take care.